We'll start with prayers. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is, Chapter 7, Knowledge of the Absolute, Text 4. Bhumihi Apaha Analaha Vayuhu Bhumirapo Analavayu Kham Manaha Buddhi Eva Cha Khamano Buddhireva Cha Ahankaraha Ahankaraha, false ego, Itiyam me, Ahankara itiyam me, Bhinna, Prakritihi, Ashtada, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada, Bhumirapo Nalo Vayuhu, Bhumirapo Nalavayu, Khammano Buddhirevacha, Khammano Buddhirevacha, Ahankara itiyam me, Ahankara itiyam me, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada, Bhumirapo Nalo Vayuhu, Bhumirapo Nalavayu, Khammano Buddhirevacha, Khammano Buddhirevacha, Ahankara itiyam me, Ahankara itiyam me, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada, Bhumirapo Nalo Vayu, Bhumirapo Nalavayu, Khammano Buddhirevacha, Khammano Buddhirevacha, Ahankara itiyam me, Ahankara itiyam me, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada. Bhumirapo Nalavayuhu, Bhumirapo Nalovayuhu, Khammano Buddhirevacha, Khammano Buddhirevacha, Ahankara itiyam me, Ahankara itiyam me, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada. Bhumirapo Nalo Vayu,
Khammano Buddhirevacha,
Khammano Buddhirevacha,
Ahankara itiyam me, Bhinna Prakritirashtada,
Bhumirapo Nalo Vayu,
भूमिरापो नलो वायु
खं मनो बुद्धिरयेव च
खं मनो बुद्धिरेव च
अहङ्कारम् इति यं मे
अहंकार इति यं मे
भिन्ना प्रकृतिरष्टधा
भिन्ना प्रकृतिरष्टधा
भूमिरापो नलो वायुः
भूमिरापो नलो वायुः
खं मनो बुद्धिरेव च
खं मनो बुद्धिरेव च
अहंकार इति यं मे
अहंकार इति यं मे
भिन्ना प्रकृतिरष्टधा
भिन्ना प्रकृतिरष्टधा भूमिः अर्थ आपः water अनलः fire वायुः air खं ether मनः mind बुद्धिः intelligence eva certainly cha and ahankarah false ego iti thus iyam all these me my bhinna separated prakriti energies ashtada total 8 translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Jai Srila Prabhupada. Translation: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence and false ego. Altogether, these 8 comprise my separated material energies. Translation with repetition: earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence and false ego. Altogether, these 8 comprise my separated material energies. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. The science of God analyzes the constitutional position of God and His diverse energies. Material nature is called Prakriti, or the energy of the Lord in His different Purusha incarnations, expansions as described in the Swatvata Tantra. Vishnostu Trini Rupani Purushakhyani Atho Viduhu Ekantu Mahataha Shashtir Dvitiyam Tva Andra Samsthitam Tritiyam Sarva Bhutastam Tani Gnatva Vimuchyate. For material creation, Lord Krishna's plenary expansion assumes 3 Vishnus. The first one, Mahavishnu, creates the total material energy known as Mahat Tattva. The second, Garbhodakshayi Vishnu, enters into all the universes to create diversities in each of them. The third, Kshirodakshayi Vishnu, is diffused as the all-pervading super soul in all the universes and is known as Paramatma, who is present even within the atoms. Anyone who knows these 3 Vishnus can be liberated from material entanglement. This material world is a temporary manifestation of one of the energies of the Lord. All the activities of the material world are directed by these 3 Vishnu expansions of Lord Krishna. These Purushas are called incarnations. Generally, one who does not know the science of God, Krishna, assumes that this material world is for the enjoyment of the living entities, and the living entities are the causes, Purushas, controllers and enjoyers of the material energy. According to Bhagavad Gita, this atheistic conclusion is false. In the verse under discussion, it is stated that Krishna is the original cause of the material manifestation. Srimad Bhagavatam also confirms this. The ingredients of the material manifestation are separated energies of the Lord. Even the Brahma Jyoti, which is the ultimate goal of the impersonalist, is a spiritual energy manifested in the spiritual sky. There are no spiritual diversities in Brahma Jyoti, as there are in the Vaikuntha Lokas, and the impersonalist accepts this Brahma Jyoti as the ultimate eternal goal. The Paramatma manifestation is also a temporary, all-pervasive aspect of the Kshirodakshayi Vishnu. The Paramatma manifestation is not eternal in the spiritual world. Therefore, the factual absolute truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. He is a complete energetic person, and he possesses different separated and internal energies. In the material energy, the principal manifestations are 8, as above mentioned. Out of these, the first 5 manifestations, namely earth, water, fire, air, and sky, are called the 5 gigantic creations or the gross creations, within which the 5 sense objects are included. They are the manifestations of physical sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. Material science comprises these 10 items and nothing more. But the other 3 items, namely mind, intelligence, and false ego, are neglected by the materialists. Philosophers who deal with mental activities are also not perfect in knowledge, because they do not know the ultimate source, Krishna. The false ego, I am, and it is mine, which constitute the basic principle of material existence, includes 10 sense organs for material activities. Intelligence refers to the total material creation, called the Mahat Tattva. Therefore, from the 8 separated energies of the Lord are manifest the 24 elements of the material world, which are the subject matter of Sankhya atheistic philosophy. They are originally offshoots from Krishna's energies and are separated from him. But atheistic Sankhya philosophers, with a poor fund of knowledge, do not know Krishna as the cause of all causes. The subject matter for discussion in the Sankhya philosophy is only the manifestation of the external energy of Krishna as it is described in the Bhagavad Gita. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhakti Vedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gnananjanashalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna devotees. So we are in the 7th chapter, in the beginning section of the 7th chapter, and this is verse 4. So as we have seen in the beginning of this chapter, Lord Krishna is instructing Arjuna, and Lord Krishna is saying, Asamshayam samagram mam yatha gnashasi tachrinu. So Lord Krishna is saying, simply by hearing, oh Arjuna, hear. And what happens by hearing this knowledge that Lord Krishna is giving in this chapter and later on, is that one can know the Supreme Lord, Asamshayam Samagram, free from doubt and incompleteness. One can understand completely the Supreme Lord and also without any doubt. And Lord then explains about 2 kinds of knowledge by which one can understand fully everything that is need to be known, and there is nothing that is left out. And that is Jnanam Teham Savijnanam. So Prabhupada translates there Jnanam as phenomenal knowledge and Vijnanam as nominal knowledge. So we saw this briefly. And then in the last section, in the last verse, we saw how out of many thousands of men, one may endeavor to attain perfection. And out of those who endeavor to attain perfection, one may actually attain perfection. And amongst those who have achieved perfection, one may actually, hardly one knows the truth about the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. So, such is the rarity of understanding the Supreme Lord in totality and free from doubt. And therefore, Prabhupada often states and emphasizes this point that we can never understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead unless we hear from the Supreme Personality of Godhead or from His bona fide representative. There is no way one can speculate to reach any conclusive understanding of who the Supreme Lord is.
Recording in progress.
And therefore, hearing from the authorized texts like Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, from the pure devotees of the Lord, help us to understand about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And starting this verse, Lord is explaining more about His creation and Himself. So let us try to understand what this verse is saying. So this verse may sound slightly unique in the sense that when Lord is saying, I'm going to explain about myself in completeness, one may wonder that, Lord will going to say about His form, maybe His abode, or something like that. But we see here that the Lord is explaining something which is very familiar for us in some sense, that is the earth, bhumir, apaha, analaha, and vayu, kham, mana, buddhir, evacha. So, ahankara. So, the Lord is beginning with the explanation of what we usually see to some extent, especially the earth, the water, fire, air, ether. So these are gross elements, so in some way or the other we can perceive them through our senses. But even more subtler than this, these are the gross elements, these are called the 5 gross elements, as Prabhupada explains. And the more subtler elements, which is beyond the perception of the senses, is mind. No one can see one's own mind, neither one can see someone else's mind. So is the intelligence. No one can see one's own intelligence, in the sense one cannot locate it directly, but only by inference, yes, we are able to distinguish few things between good and bad, right and wrong. We are able to make some judgments, and using that as the inference, we know, yes, we have got some intelligence. And similarly, we consider that others also have got similarly some intelligence. Similarly, this ahankara, which is even more subtler than the mind and intelligence, is even more difficult to identify. And therefore, it is even more difficult for people to understand what is false ego, what kind of false egos we possess, and why do we possess, how do we possess. So this is even more subtler subject matter. And Prabhupada says that beyond all these subtle things is the soul, and beyond the soul is the Supreme Lord, the Super Soul. So like this, there are finer and finer elements that are present in this creation, and to understand them becomes more and more difficult as one moves towards more and more subtler elements. And therefore, Prabhupada says that the Vedic literatures also say that what lies beyond our perception, we cannot understand by any other means other than the means of Shruti or the Pramana, the Vedic literatures. Therefore, the only way to understand the subtle aspects, the truth about the subtle aspects of existence, is only by hearing from the bona fide source. And therefore, this verse is also very important because it is helping us to understand what we directly perceive to what we cannot directly perceive, and going finer and finer. And as we will see in the next verse, there is a still further aspect, fineness of existence, that is the different kind of energy of the Lord is being described. So, another reason why this verse is also there are a couple of reasons why this verse is important to understand, is because one of the reasons is it is very difficult to distinguish whether am I this body, am I this mind, or am I something more than this. In the Western philosophy, usually there is something known as dualism. Especially this was proposed by Descartes, and according to him, there is 2 classes, 2 entities in the world, in the creation, in the existence. One is called the mind, and the other is called matter. So there is only 2 divisions. There is no further division to explain things in a more vivid or clear manner. And there is another class of people who are materialists who think everything is materialism, everything is made up of matter, and there is nothing else beyond matter. However, as we see, the teachings of Sankhya Yoga, as taught by Kapila and as taught by Lord Krishna, gives us furthermore clarification of what is material, what is spiritual, and what are the different kinds of material energies that are present. And therefore, this verse helps us to understand and recognize the different individual entities which are present in existence and how they are a single unit. That means you cannot take that unit and make into something else. For example, earth is unique, water is different. And similarly, the mind is different and intelligence is different. And so is the false ego is different. But in the Western philosophy, they will combine mind, intelligence, and false ego all into one. And even sometimes the soul into the mind. And therefore, it becomes very difficult to understand what is causing what. So there is no clear distinction between where is the consciousness coming from, where is the false ego coming from, and so on and so forth. And therefore, there is lack of clarity. And therefore, people speculate a lot, especially when the things are not directly perceivable. And therefore, in the Western philosophy, they cannot reach to any perfect conclusion because no one can ascertain for sure as what lies beyond our perception. And therefore, this understanding as given by Lord Krishna is very, very important. One more reason why this verse is also very important is because this verse is also talking about not just the energies that are present here, but how they are related to the Supreme Lord. Usually in the material world, there is an interesting translation here. Prabhupada translates Prakriti as energies, or Prabhupada also mentions Prakriti as material energy, or Prabhupada also translates at certain places Prakriti as material nature. So, usually when people see material nature, people think of that as independent energy. That is, the material scientists, when they try to understand this energy, they do not see what lies behind the energy. Where is it coming from? So they only can study what is this electrical energy, what is this gravitational energy, or different forms of energy, the sound form of energy, but they cannot see what lies beyond it. Where is it coming from? Where is this energy coming from? So as soon as one wants to understand where is it coming from, in fact, as we see, most people do not even ask this question. I'm always surrounded by this land, I'm surrounded by water, I'm surrounded by fire. All these things are surrounding me. Where did they come from? Why do all these things exist? And how are they coming into existence? So Prabhupada says, even to ask this strong philosophical question is very, very difficult for most people. And therefore the previous verse, Manushyanam Sahasreshu, very few people are actually interested to understand the nature of the absolute truth, the nature of truth in totality. And some may endeavor for that. But here, that description is very clearly given. And if one just pays oral reception by proper hearing, one can actually understand all these truths very easily without any necessity to speculate or theorize and philosophize unwantedly. So here, the energies are not only described, but they are also being described in relation to the Supreme Lord, the Absolute Truth, how they are related. And usually, in the other philosophies like Mayavada and the Shunyavadi and Nirvisheshavadi, so they consider that this, for example, the Mayavadis, they consider Brahma Satyam Jagat Mityam. So they do not ascertain any value to the material existence. They say this is all false, this is all illusion. As soon as your illusion goes away, you will see everything to be same. So they do not make any distinctions. Similarly, the Buddhist Nirvisheshavadis, Shunyavadis, they do not ascertain, they think that everything is coming from material elements. There is nothing more than material elements. So as soon as the material elements disintegrate and there is no individual desire, then there is nothing to worry about. But Prabhupada says we are none of these, but rather we are Visheshavadis. Prabhupada says that we consider that the soul has an individual entity which has its own form and which is different from all different material energies. And how it is also related to the Supreme Lord is what we understand, and therefore the Vaishnava philosophy is very, very higher than all other philosophies. So Prabhupada explains how a Vaishnava understanding of this world also helps us much more better than any other philosophy. So, having stated that, let us also look at one more reason why this world, understanding this world is also very important. So, usually the Mayavadis think that the practitioners of Bhakti Yoga, the devotees, are sentimentalists. They do not have knowledge. But actually this is not true. In fact, as we also see in the Chaturshloki Bhagavad Gita, where it is said, Tadami buddhi yogam tam, tesham satata yuktanam, bhajatam priti purvakam, tadami buddhi yogam tam. The Lord gives all knowledge to a devotee, a sincere devotee who is constantly serving the Supreme Lord with love and devotion. The Supreme Lord provides all knowledge. And also, as we can see from these literatures that are available to us, in fact, they provide us with all complete knowledge that is required for anyone to understand. And one important aspect here is that usually that the Supreme Lord is sometimes considered to be present in the spiritual world, and people think there is no relationship between the Supreme Lord and this world. And therefore, sometimes people think, I have to only go and worship the Lord in the temple, who is only present in the form of the deity, and everything else is not relevant. So this is also what we see in the explanation of Kanistadhikari. So he says that the Lord is only present in the form of the temple, in the form of the deity in the temple, and everything else is not connected to the Supreme Lord. But this is not the complete understanding. As we see in the example of Mahabhagavata, how a Mahabhagavata sees everywhere the Supreme Lord. He sees how the different energies of the Lord are manifested in this world. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada gives a beautiful explanation that the science of God analyzes the constitutional position of God and its diverse energies. So it is very important that in the greater understanding of the knowledge about the Supreme Lord, or in fact here Prabhupada mentions the science of God, not only understands the position of the Lord, but also all the diverse energies which are related, which are coming from Him. Therefore, in order to understand the science of God, one must understand the God and all His energies, all His diverse energies. It is never separate. It's not that I just understand the God and have no understanding of any of the diverse energies of the Lord. No. One has to understand in totality to understand the science of God. And this verse is helping us to add that element of science of God, which is the phenomenal world, the world which we can perceive, and the subtle world which we may not perceive, but which is in the material world. So, therefore, this verse helps us to understand how this material existence is connected to the Supreme Lord. So here, the Supreme Lord is saying, Bhinna Prakritir Ashtada. So these 8 elements are my external separated energies, my separated material energies. So what does this mean? Bhinna. Bhinna means separated. So what does Bhinna mean? So Prabhupada gives wonderful explanation in his lectures about what does the word Bhinna means. So Prabhupada gives one example of that, someone recording a sound. So imagine someone is speaking. In fact, Prabhupada says, Prabhupada is speaking and someone is recording in the tape recorder, and later on someone can play that energy, that tape. So Prabhupada says, this form of sound is my energy, now this is separated. And now this is stored in a different form, in a tape form. And it is functioning like my sound, but it is not it is separated from me. It is not me. It's not my sound now. But it is my energy now which is translated as separated from me. Therefore, Prabhupada also explains this furthermore by saying that bhinna prakriti, or the separated energy, means that one cannot perceive the person behind whose energy is actually separated from. That means, Prabhupada says, when this is material energy of the Lord, this is the separated energy of the Lord, what it means is that when we see this material energy, we do not see the person behind the energy, that is the Supreme Lord. So this energy makes us forgetful of the Supreme Lord. It does not directly help us perceive the Supreme Lord, who is the cause, whose energy is this. And therefore, this is called separated energy. Whereas the Lord's internal energy helps us to remember the Lord, whereas the external energy, it does not help us to directly perceive the Supreme Lord. And because it does not help us to directly perceive the Supreme Lord, even though this energy is the energy of the Lord, we are not able to perceive Him. In fact, in various places it is mentioned. For example, in Vishnu Purana, it is said, Parasya Brahmana Shaktis Tatedam Akhilam Jagat. Whatever manifestations we experience are nothing but various energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here in Vishnu Purana, it is said that any manifestation that we experience, anything that we see, anything in creation, anything in existence, in fact, they are nothing but various energies of the Supreme Lord. So this is in Mahabhagavata, when he sees this different manifestation of the Supreme Lord, he sees these to be the energies of the Lord. He remembers the Lord. He does not see the disconnect between the material energy and the Supreme Lord. And as we will see in the next verse, how the spiritual energy or the living entity is para energy or superior energy. But Prabhupada also mentions, from the perspective of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no distinction between superior and inferior. The inferior is because we are not able to perceive, but a pure devotee, for him, he can also perceive the person behind the material energy. And therefore, for him, he doesn't distinguish between inferior and superior. But for a conditioned living entity, the inferior energy does not help to remember the Supreme Lord. But then, Srila Prabhupada says how the material energy can also be converted into spiritual energy. Prabhupada says that when the material energy is used in the service of the Lord, as we see here that all these energies are my separated energies. That means that these are all the energies of the Supreme Lord. So when these all different energies, we recognize that these are all earth, water, fire, air, ether, all these are different, mind, intelligence, they are all the energies of the Supreme Lord, and when they are engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord, they become spiritual. And therefore Prabhupada says, we are not like Mayavadis. We do not say this temple is not required. We don't say that money is not required. We do not say like that. We do not say that this is all illusion. No. We say this all belongs to the Supreme Lord. This is all the energy of the Supreme Lord. And thus it must be engaged in the service of the Lord. And therefore Prabhupada says that anything that is utilized in the service of the Lord becomes spiritual energy. It is not material energy, because it is helping us to remember the Lord. Material energy, material means forgetfulness of Krishna. Anything which is helping remember Krishna, whichever is engaged in the service of the Lord, is no more material. So Srila Prabhupada has expertly taught us how do we engage these different material energies, how do we see these different material energies as the separated energies of the Lord, and how one should engage all these different energies in the service of the Supreme Lord, and thereby convert these material energies into spiritual energies. And therefore Prabhupada said that we should build different nice temples, beautifully decorate the deities, and do different activities in the temple. So these are not to be considered material. These are not like ordinary activities, because here the focus is the Lord. Whereas on the other hand, one may build beautiful big buildings, but because the Lord is not in the center, it becomes material energy, and it binds one and entangles one more and more. Whereas when it is used in the service of the Lord, it helps one become liberated. And therefore, this distinction and how to use this material energy in the service of the Lord is very important to understand for us not to be entangled by the material energy. Another important point to be noted here is that the word ahankara, so Prabhupada translates as false ego. So this is another very important word to note. So why Prabhupada is saying it to be false ego? So it is important to note that there is something known as real ego and there is false ego. So the false ego is that when one identifies with something which one is not. So ego means identification, and the false ego means false identification. So false identification means when one understands or one thinks that I am this body. As soon as one thinks I am this body, which he is not, he is having the false ego, the false identification. Whereas, on the other hand, the real identification is that aham brahmasmi, I am spirit soul. And Prabhupada says that unless one does not come to this real understanding, as we also see in Bhagavad Gita, Brahma bhuta prasannatma na sochati na kankshati. So, unless one does not come to the real identification, one's activities are not properly situated. And therefore, Prabhupada also says that Shrotavyadini Rajendra Ninam Santi Sahasrasaha. So people who are not situated in the right constitutional position, they are always engaged in hearing various topics, because they do not because they are not hearing the right topics of which are describing Supreme Lord, and therefore Pashyatam Apashyatam Atmatattvam. So they cannot see the Atmatattvam, the true nature of the self. The true nature of the self is very difficult to see. And the false ego is the one which binds or which prevents one from seeing one's true nature. In fact, in the description of Sankhya philosophy, as propounded by Lord Kapila Deva, the false ego is considered to be the root cause. So it is from the false ego that the different, so it is mentioned there that originally the living entity is in pure consciousness or Krishna consciousness. But because of the marginal independence that the living entity has got, the living entity can fall down to this false ego. And as soon as the false identification comes, and then the material existence begins for the living entity. And therefore, it is, Prabhupada mentions that our job is twofold. One is not only to become Krishna conscious, but also to be careful not to fall down. And therefore, Prabhupada says that one has to be very careful, just like the sharp edge of the razor. So Prabhupada says it is very natural because of the marginal potency or the independent tendency of the living entity. There is always a chance of being forgetful of Krishna. And therefore, one has to be very careful with one's false ego. One has to be very conscious that one does not fall back into this wrong identification, and always be careful to be engaged in devotional service and remain in one's original constitutional position, without which one is going to engage in activities which are not truly beneficial for the living entity. And therefore, this understanding this ahankara or false ego is very important. And in fact, unless we do not hear from pure devotees of the Lord, it is very difficult to even to recognize that one is leading a life of false identification. So unless we do not pay attention to understanding these aspects of ahankara, of how it is binding us, how it is misleading us in different ways, we continue in this cycle of material existence. And then there are few other things Prabhupada is mentioning, that that the atheistic conception of this material energy. So in the atheistic conception, what people think is that this material energy is not coming from the Supreme Lord. I am the controller. I am the controller and enjoyer of this material energy, and therefore they assume that this whole world is meant for their enjoyment and for their controlling, and therefore they try to amass as much wealth as possible by hook or crook. They think this belongs to me. I should somewhere or the other grab as many ways as possible different resources of the material nature because I am the controller. So this is the atheistic asuric tendency. So as we see in the modern world, the different multinational corporations, all they are planning in different ways how do we acquire different natural resources, oil, now even the food, water, every resource people wants to capture because they think it belongs to me. Because of this, there is unwanted scarcity, unwanted fights. But as soon as one understands the science of God, one recognizes, Prabhupada says, as soon as one recognizes that the Supreme Lord is the proprietor of everything, so many fights, unwanted fights will just vanquish. The world will become peaceful. And therefore, this asuric tendency is coming because of lack of understanding of how this energy is actually related to the Supreme Lord and how it must be actually engaged in the service of the Lord. So that is another point Prabhupada brings here. And it is also important to note that Prabhupada brings about Sankhya atheistic philosophy towards the end. So actually the Sankhya philosophy means analytical study of the material existence. So one is the atheistic Sankhya philosophy. The another is the Sankhya Yoga as propounded by Lord Kapila Deva. So in the Lord Kapila Deva's explanation of Sankhya philosophy, one becomes a devotee of the Lord. Whereas when one hears the Sankhya philosophy as proposed by the atheistic philosophers, one does not become a devotee. Rather, he thinks these material elements in their different analytical elements are all in all, and there is no relation to the Supreme Lord. So this is very important. So one may be theoretically knowing Sankhya philosophy, but unless one does not learn as taught by the Lord himself or by his pure devotee, one does not get to the essence of it, that is, to serve the Supreme Lord. So therefore, this understanding of the Sankhya philosophy or even the analytical study as being presented here is for one to become a devotee, is to see the Lord in all aspects. As we will see in the further chapters, how Lord will further elaborate in the 10th chapter his various opulences. So how in various forms the Lord can be perceived. So these different energies, when we can perceive the Lord who is present behind these energies, we become more advanced in our Krishna consciousness. So that is another point that we could see here. And another reason also, as we see in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is also mentioned the Virata form, as we will also see in the 11th chapter, also in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the Virata Rupa of the Lord is mentioned. Because also sometimes it is very difficult for people to directly understand the Supreme Lord who is behind all these manifestations. And therefore, by helping them understand the phenomenal world and making them understand that this world is so supremely energetic. And Prabhupada gives an example in that purport saying that the Aborigines, the tribal people, they think of a tiger who has got more energy and they respect. And similarly, something like thunder, which is more powerful, they start respecting such beautiful manifestation. So similarly, one can understand how beautifully this energy is present. And Prabhupada says, how this much amount of water is available? How can one understand that this is the energy of the Lord? Prabhupada explains by saying that just like a human being, he has got some energy, and from him there comes sweat, and therefore there may be some amount of water that may come out of a living person, a human being. But imagine the Lord who is so gigantic, who is so huge, who is inconceivably large, who is inconceivable. and inconceivably energetic. And from him, endless amount of water can come. And therefore, Prabhupada says that this energy that is coming, one should be able to see the supreme energetic. So this manifestation, understanding of this, is meant to help us to understand the energetic who is present behind this. And therefore, the phenomenal understanding of the world is not to be denied, but rather is to be understood in connection with the Supreme Lord. And therefore, all these understandings are always beneficial for us to become more and more Krishna conscious by seeing in every aspect of our existence there is presence of the Lord. In some form, it is very direct, and some form, it is the representation of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, this knowledge of understanding how these are different energies of the Lord is very important. Another point Srila Prabhupada mentions is that Prabhupada says that the matter never comes from, in fact, the modern scientific theory says that life comes from matter. But Prabhupada says that matter comes from life. And Prabhupada says that as in the example of water, which is coming from the body of the Supreme Lord, Prabhupada also mentions that as soon as a living entity, there is a presence of the soul, the body grows. That means the matter is taking some form, it's growing. But as soon as a person is dead, the matter does not grow. And therefore, Prabhupada says that it is from the Supreme Lord, through his inconceivable transcendental energy, Achintya Shakti, that this material energy is also coming. Although the Supreme Lord is spiritual, as we see here, he takes the form of the three Vishnus, the Mahavishnu, Garbhodaksha Vishnu, Shirodaksha Vishnu, by which he agrees to take this, create this material manifestation. And therefore, it is so yes, so I was trying to say that the matter comes from life. So Prabhupada is saying the Supreme Lord, who is all spiritual, it is from him he can, through his inconceivable spiritual potency, he can bring out this material manifestation. But it is not true by just by simply this material energy, they can combine together in some form and create life. That is not true. And Prabhupada also goes on to state that, as we see in Bhagavad Gita, it is also mentioned that the material energy is not independent. It is always acting under the direction of the Supreme Lord. Maya dakshena prakriti suyate sa characharam. So there is the Supreme Lord who is the controller, as we also see here, Vishnustu trini rupani purushakhyani atho viduhu. So for material creation, Lord Krishna's plenary expansion assumes three Vishnus. The first one, Mahavishnu, creates the total material energy known as Mahatattva. And so Prabhupada also explains that these Purushas are called incarnations. So Prabhupada is saying, so these are the controllers. Purusha means the enjoyer or the controller. So the Lord Krishna expands himself into these three Vishnu forms. And it is from this that this material manifestation is taking place. And not simply that the material energy on its own is functioning and leading to all this material creation. So without the Lord taking these three different incarnations and controlling and maintaining and destroying this material existence, it is not possible for material energy to work on its own. And the modern science cannot explain how this is manifested, how this is maintaining on its own, and how it is dissolving. This is not possible unless we do not hear from the Shastras. And therefore, by understanding the temporary manifestation of these material energies and their relation to the Supreme Lord, and how the Lord is in control of all of these things, they are really helpful for us to become better devotees of the Lord. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.
So you told in the Vishnu Purana it is mentioned, what is that? Parasya Brahmana Sakti.
Yeah.
So that means everything is an expansion of the Supreme Absolute Truth. Correct?
Yes.
But the Buddhists or the Sunyavadis, they say that everything is coming from matter.
Yes.
How do they miss out such obvious things that it is coming from the Lord? Or why is it absent in their philosophy? Or how can you convince them?
Yes. So one of the reasons they fail to understand the subtler aspects is, so especially first principle that they tend to deny is the denial of existence of the soul. And because of the lack of the soul, they go on to further state that anything, because all that we see is existence of matter only, or different forms of manifestations of matter, it is eventually only matter that exists. So one way to convince them is to first bring to the understanding that there is something that soul exists. And one of the ways they tend to deny the existence of the soul, one way, so in philosophy, if we want to establish a certain principle to exist, we need to show that it can exist independent of the body. So right now in the body, they are not able to see the soul, so they think that the body as matter itself is everything. And because I cannot see an independent soul which is existing, therefore I deny the existence of the soul. But the way to, one way people explain is that, so in the analytical way of philosophizing, one would take in the most elementary component and show that it is distinct from the other element. So in case of body and mind, the way to show that none of the mental activities are performed directly by the body or the matter. And therefore there has to be something distinct about mind which is perform it something more which the body is not able to perform. Similarly, the idea of consciousness, that is what is distinct to the soul, which is not present to the body and mind, needs to be explained to them in a way which can help them relate. So many of the philosophers in the past of Buddhists have tried to not agree upon this principle. It's just because they just deny it without saying that there is no evidence to it.
Brahmana Sakti.
Why they do not accept. No, so that's about how to explain. But I think as we see that, so this knowledge is guhyatamam guhyatara. So this knowledge, although easily available, it is not appreciable unless the Lord's mercy is not present, unless it is not received, and therefore we are supposed not to perform sinful activities and perform pious activities which make us eligible to understand the higher truths. So unless one is not performing spiritual practices or having acquired, so it is also said that in order to understand Bhakti Yoga, one must have some previous qualification. If not, it is not possible to understand. Or the only way is by the mercy of a pure devotee, one is able to acquire that knowledge. So, but in this world, there are so many different kinds of people who are not fortunate enough to have that previous punya or the mercy of having met a pure devotee or having heard from a philosophy which is quite different. Because most often when I even meet them, they have never heard a philosophy of this kind. They are only heard a different confusing philosophy. So that opportunity also never presented, and that could be the reason why they are not able to understand.
Prabhu, I heard that, I'm not sure how it is correct or not wrong, But I heard that Buddhism and Gautam Buddha is one of the incarnation of Krishna. Is it true?
Yes, we agree as Buddha as an incarnation of the Lord. It is also mentioned in Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
But the philosophy that is presented by Buddha is meant for one class of people. So it is not the complete philosophy. So we do not agree with that philosophy primarily because it does not accept the authority of the Vedas. So one of the primary criteria for, so according to our philosophy, we do not accept anyone to be theistic who is not accepting the conclusions of the Vedas. And because they do not accept the conclusions of the Vedas, and only because as I also mentioned briefly, that the only way to understand things which are beyond perception is through Shruti, not by speculation. But for Shruti, one must have faith in the Vedas. But because they do not have faith in Vedas, so they concoct or they move away from the conclusions of the Vedic knowledge, and therefore we do not agree to the philosophy as presented by Buddha, that is only for a specific people to not to be too much atheistic, but rather come to the next stage of that. But it is not the end of all philosophies.
Maybe at the time of incarnation of Buddha, maybe the people
Yes.
are not good enough to accept that kind of knowledge. So that's why Buddha did not teach Vedas and those kind of knowledge probably.
Yes. So actually, people were committing sinful activities in the name of Vedas. So they were killing animals unwantedly. And in order to prevent that sinful activities of the people, Lord appeared to divert from killing of the animals. And then again, Lord appears in different incarnations to again further elaborate on the message.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay, if there are no questions or comments, we'll stop here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Shri Gaunita ki jai. Granthiraj Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Hare Krishna. Thank you all for joining.